Hi, my name is Marissa Maloof, and today I'm going to talk with you about the one-year filing deadline to asylum. But first, a little bit about my background. Before this job, I worked as an asylum officer with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That means that on a daily basis, I was interviewing applicants for asylum and I was adjudicating and deciding their cases. Before that, I was a law clerk and attorney advisor at the Los Angeles Immigration Court. In that job, I would work with the judges on their decisions and actually draft decisions for them, mostly dealing with asylum. So asylum is something that I'm very, very passionate about and that is my area of expertise. So something that a lot of people actually don't realize is that there is a filing deadline to the asylum process. You are supposed to file your application for asylum within 1 year of your last entry into the United States. But however, there are quite a few exceptions to that filing deadline. And I would find often at the asylum office that people's lack of knowledge either about the deadline or about those exceptions would actually make it so they were not eligible for relief or so they weren't prepared for the really important parts of their asylum interview. So the first big exception is that there are changed conditions. And there's actually 3 little facets to this changed conditions idea. The first would be that there were changed personal circumstances that you had where now you're eligible for asylum, whereas maybe when you first entered the United States, you were not eligible for asylum. So some examples of that would be, for instance, say you entered a few years ago, but just recently your family was threatened in your home country. That would be considered a changed circumstance that would overcome the 1-year filing deadline because now you're eligible, whereas before you weren't. And you don't even necessarily have to prove that, you're fully eligible. It just has to be something that is relevant to your asylum case. Another changed condition that comes up a lot in the 1 year to overcome the 1-year filing deadline is changed conditions in the country where you're from. And this comes up for us all the time with our clients from Venezuela or Turkey or other countries that, have more recently gone through some really, troubling political times. And so basically what this means is that maybe when you first entered the United States, you didn't have a good claim for asylum because things were fairly peaceful in your country, but that because of recent developments, you now have a good claim for asylum. And then the third is a change in U.S. law, a change condition in the United States law where now you're eligible for asylum or have a good chance at asylum, whereas in the past you did not. Oftentimes this could come up with just different cases that have happened in the Ninth Circuit or the Board of Immigration Appeals, where maybe when you entered there was not a claim for asylum, but now because of this change in case law, you actually have a good claim for relief. So overall, if anything big has changed in your life, your family's life, in the country where you're from, it's a good, and you're now afraid to return, you might want to consider filing for asylum. And it's also a good idea, if you're afraid, to always contact an attorney and see if maybe there was a change in the United States law, where now you would be eligible, if you feel some fear but you didn't apply right away. The other big umbrella exception to the 1-year filing deadline is called exceptional circumstances. And these can be shown through a number of different ways. And basically what this idea is that you were not able to file for asylum because something was stopping you from doing that. There was something exceptional that stopped you from doing it beyond just that you didn't feel up to it or you didn't know about asylum. So the big ones where this tends to come up, especially in the asylum context, is that you had some type of physical or oftentimes mental disability or condition that made it so it was hard for you to apply for asylum. Specifically in asylum at the asylum office, there were many times that applicants could overcome this by showing that they had some PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder or depression symptoms. It doesn't mean that you have to have been diagnosed with those things, but just that, it was really difficult for you to talk about what happened to you. And so it took you a while to come around and realize that you needed to apply for asylum and actually feel comfortable in doing that. Another example would be that there was some type of illness that you had or that a member of your family had, just so it was really difficult for you to go to talk to an attorney about your options for filing for asylum. Another exceptional circumstance that comes up quite frequently is that you actually maintained a lawful status for a long period of time, and that, you know, once that status expires, and that now your status has expired, you're not expected to be applying for asylum if you currently have another legal status in a different, in a different context. And a final one that often does come up is just that you were underage, that you were under the age of 18. So that's considered a legal disability, and you weren't really able, under our law, we consider that you weren't really able to file for asylum by yourself because you were a minor. So all of those are ways that you can prove that you have an exception to the 1-year filing deadline. But once you prove that, it's not over. You also then have to prove that not only do you have an exception, but that then, once that exception came about, or once your status ended, for example, that you filed within a reasonable time. And typically that can be, typically the government views that as 6 months. When I was at the asylum office, we all pretty much viewed it as if someone files within 6 months of their status expiring, of them turning 18, that we believe that, okay, in that case, they actually did file within a reasonable time frame. But all of these can be tricky arguments to make, and sometimes people just are not prepared in the asylum interview for these types of questions. They go in just thinking that they are only going to talk about their fear. So this is why it's very important to have an immigration lawyer represent you at that asylum interview or an immigration court to come up with these arguments, work with you, and see if there is an exception in your case, so that way you can get the relief that you deserve. So please call our office if you're interested in applying for asylum. Our phone number is 800-792-9889. Thank you.